delighted to welcome to Property Tribes TV a guest who has exemplary property credentials. It's Ed Mead. And Ed, it's lovely to meet you and to talk to you and welcome you to Property Tribes. And it's hard to know where to start with you really, because you've got such all-encompassing experience of the sector, 37 years in a estate agency, property and TV pundit, serving on the board of the Ombudsman. So you've got such wide-ranging experience, and you must have seen many changes over your time in the sector.
Well, I think one of the most interesting changes actually is that when I started, which was back in the 70s, people didn't really want to be an estate agent. I mean, it was slightly considered to be a gentleman's profession, but that's a slightly different thing. But if you lined up 100 people in those days, age 18, and said, who wants to be an estate agent? I don't think anyone would have put their hands up. So they all went off, tried something else, and then went into being estate agents. Mm-hmm. These days, actually, because property is so much part of our lives, a lot more people think of it as being something they'd like to go into. The only thing that hasn't changed, unfortunately, is the requirement of people to be qualified to do it, which is very frustrating from my point of view, I have to say.
And I guess we can draw a correlation that with landlords, because there's no qualifications needed to be a landlord, no real barriers to entry in terms of qualifications, and I guess that's something one of the reasons why there is increasing regulation, as actually also for estate agents, lettings agents, as well as landlords, because government is wanting to professionalise the sector.
Yes, I mean, we know perfectly well that the reason a lot of your watchers here will be landlords is not because not because they chose to be necessarily, and people are landlords for all sorts of different reasons. What I think is far more worrying, and I'm sure a lot of people follow Property Tribes because they're self-managing and do it themselves, but nevertheless, one of the things that I was always incredibly surprised about was that agents that handled lettings, so lettings agents, didn't even have to be members of a redress scheme up until a couple of years ago. Estate agents have had to be for years, but lettings agents handle cash. They handle day-to-day cash. So to me, it's remarkable that the letting side of the industry hasn't been regulated or looked at in a stronger way. So I think landlords have had it tough for quite some time, and I think it's great news really that guys like you are here to help inform, to help people learn from other people's mistakes.
Indeed. Actually, talking of letting agent regulation, obviously one of the big things on the agenda is the ban on tenant fees. What's your view on that?
Well, apart from the fact that it keeps getting kicked into the long grass, I think it's April next year now, isn't it? They're saying it might. One of the most irritating things was that they put out the proposals to consultation and then announced what they were doing, which was remarkable but fairly typical of politicians in some ways. I mean, we've had, 16 housing ministers in the last 19 years or something. It's madness. I am frustrated in some ways by the lack of understanding about tenants' fees, and I think that the sales sector has always been hamstrung by the fact that people can go around bidding on as many properties as they like without worrying about it, and that creates all sorts of issues like gazumping, people saying they'll buy something then pulling out, and there's no commitment. The one thing tenants' fees always used to do was, provided they were done in moderation, and my own feeling is that there should be a cap on fees rather than a complete ban on fees. Is that it gave the tenant some skin in the game, and it stopped them going around bidding on lots of things and creating lots of unnecessary paperwork. So I think the government could do well to continue to talk, which it now looks like they're going to do, hopefully a little bit more, and I would be an advocate of a cap rather than a ban.
No, I think that's a very, very valid point. There's nothing to stop tenants going around and just bidding on lots of different properties, and yeah, it's not going to be a good thing really for agents or landlords if they do that. Let's talk about the landlord side of things. I was very interested to see that you recently wrote an article about Section 24. What's your view on the impact that Section 24 is going to have on the private rented sector?
Well, I mean, we all know that the private rented sector has just grown massively. It's now bigger than the assisted sector, so the guys watching are part of a very, very big organisation or a very big group. Back in 2015, when it was mooted, it seemed like a long way away. Now, suddenly, heaven forbid, people are really feeling the pinch, thinking, what are we going to do? They're wondering about negative yields. They're thinking, how are we going to change things? And I think the problem is that, and I was on the agents panel for the Bank of England who were looking at this, and they were worried that 1 in 8 loans was being made to buy-to-let landlords. They had this ridiculous Daily Mail style view that all landlords would head for the exit as soon as rates went up, mortgage rates went up. And of course, we all know that most people who own buy-to-let properties are sensible people who own 1 or 2 properties. It's part of their wealth, but they manage them carefully for their tenants, and they're not flighty people who are trying to rip off everybody. So, and I think the government have been politically very naive, thinking that landlords are likely to sell their properties, and first-time buyers will buy those properties, which is, I think they admitted that's what they were trying to do. They wanted less landlords and more first-time buyers.
Indeed.
So I think the problem for landlords now is that they're looking around for things to help make their investments work for them. And one of the things they've been doing, and part of the reason I wrote my article recently, was to do with the business I've set up, helping people do things without estate agents, or not without estate agents, but things that they can do to help themselves without needing to instruct an agent. And they're looking to think about getting rid of that 5, 10, 15% they pay to their agents. But there are lots of other things they can do. Obviously, we've been talking about people, or the industry's been talking about people turning themselves into companies. You've got REITs popping up, people can put things into. So there are lots of things for people to look at, but thank heavens there are people like you who can help them work out what the options are. Otherwise, what would they do?
I mean, I totally agree with you, and I think my personal belief is that there's a massive disconnect between local government that's working at the coalface to provide accommodation for numerous families. We've heard of waiting lists of 5,000 families waiting to get into private sector accommodation because there's no social housing. And then you've got central government policies that are deterring landlords from coming into the sector. You've got landlord licensing. So even take a council like Croydon, they're screaming for landlords, but they've also introduced landlord licensing. And it just seems to me that nobody's joining up the dots here and coming up with a coherent way to keep landlords in the sector in a way that's sustainable for everybody.
Well, I know, and as we just said, the private rented sector is now bigger than the assisted sector, and it is a vital part of the answer. I think the main problem we have is that there's no long-term solution. We have these ridiculous swings between left and right, and people get a lot of politically naive people want to impose what they think is the answer. So it swings about. What we need is a centralised cross-party solution that is put in place for the long term. Now, obviously, that includes building a lot more property for the assisted sector. We know that, and a lot more building full stop. But the private rented sector stops. Politicians need to stop thinking of the private rented sector as a sort of Van Hoogstraten rip-off brigade, and they need to look at it as part of the solution.
And obviously the media has a lot to answer for in the way that they portray landlords, always talking about rogue landlords and these stories of damp, mouldy properties. And they are the minority. The majority of landlords are decent, hard-working people that provide a good standard of accommodation and have just got into property as a pension hedge or a legacy for their children. And, you know, it's hard to know how we as landlords can have a voice and have our opinions put across in the media because they don't want to hear them.
Well, I think I would just say that the property ombudsman, who represent the vast majority of agents, something like 90–95% of all agents, there are about 2,500 complaints a year on the letting side. That's out of a transaction number which must be approaching 1 million. That's a tiny fraction of people who complain and require redress. So it is mostly a very sensibly run business. But of course, the media loves a story. You can understand that. And so they will pick on the bad bits. And you never hear about the good bits. They need to come here to hear about the good bits.
Indeed. That's what we're all about, the good, positive bits. Let's move on now because you've started a new venture. Which is an outsourcing viewing service for landlords and lettings agents called Viewber. And it's just funny because the timing of this interview is interesting because in the last few weeks we had a lot of people coming onto Property Tribe saying, oh, I need somebody to do a viewing for me. Seems you've got the timing right for this.
Well, as an agent, I knew our Saturday diaries, and that was, forget Sunday, this is just Saturday diaries, used to fill up by Tuesday, Wednesday. So if you called up wanting to see a property, on a Saturday or Sunday after a Tuesday, you'd be told, sorry, you have to wait till the week after or whatever. And I thought that's just ridiculous. And I wanted to come up with a solution where there would be a network of people all over the UK who were vetted on a very simple database, accessible via software, where you can book someone to go and do a viewing or an inspection or an open house, so a tenancy comes to an end. And actually, there's no reason at all why landlords, I mean, we've actually put a Stripe facility on the website so that they can now buy their own viewings or open houses whenever they need to. And it's our fastest growing area, so clearly there are a lot of landlords out there who really like the idea of having a service they can dip in and out of. And it is one of those things that previously they probably had to instruct an agent to do, but they didn't need the rest of the stuff the agent was often doing. They could quite happily have just done with the little bit they need when they need it. So to have an on-demand army we've currently got over 4,000 people now all over the UK that you can just book online, it's very, very simple, and I knew as an agent that there was a requirement for it.
Yeah, and out of hours, as you mentioned, is important for tenants because they're often at work. But even things like meeting a gas safety engineer at the property if the tenant isn't able to. Viewers are there to do that, aren't they?
Well, what's really revolutionised it actually are these new key safes. I mean, people don't understand 30 million viewings a year in the States are done with key safes. Airbnb wouldn't exist without key safes. And the new generation of things, we can get a key safe fitted for 50 quid anywhere in the UK the following day. And you put a key safe subtly on a property somewhere. People say, oh, isn't that insecure? Well, no one's going to spend 2 hours breaking into a key safe. If they want to get in, they'll smash the door or smash the window. So it's revolutionised access for contractors. There are these new Bluetooth key safes. So, to get a local viewer to go in and do as you say, meet a contractor or to fit a key safe and let a contractor get access, again, it's revolutionising the way landlords can manage their own properties.
No, I love it. It's all part of what we call the gig economy.
Yep.
And I think the other thing is that there are landlords out there looking for additional income streams, perhaps to counter the impact of Section 24. You're looking for viewers, the people that actually undertake the viewings, aren't you?
Well, we will always welcome people. I mean, we're getting about 20 a day who sign up. We obviously then vet them and put them on the database. And yes, I mean, if landlords want to do viewings in their own areas, we would welcome them. Obviously, the business grows in sort of fits and starts. Suddenly we'll get a whole load of viewers coming in, and then we get a lot more business coming in. So sometimes there can be a little bit of disconnect. People sign up thinking, oh great, I'm going to be doing 10 viewings a day for the next week, and it takes a bit of time for that to build up. But now I think landlords and their ability to manage their own properties to look at yield in a way that works for them and help themselves, I think services like these are a great way for them to manage that.
No, I think they are. They absolutely are. So as we just close out here, if you looked back over your 37 years, things that probably seemed like a roller coaster at the time might look less like a mild kind of hill to get over. I think landlords looking forward, we are concerned about the future, we see the challenges. What advice would you give to a landlord now that's kind of got doubts about the sector? Do you see opportunity still there for them?
Oh, I definitely do, but I think that the landlords that I've known, and I've known some clients for 30, 40 years, have always looked at the long term. They've always looked at capital growth as being the real place that the bonus comes. I would always advise people to look at yield as a way of maintaining the property. To go into buy-to-let, I think, with thinking it's going to pay for your life, that's a bonus. If you can actually make money over and above maintaining the fabric of the property. So I would urge people to look at it as a long-term investment, and to make sure that they spend the requisite amounts of money keeping the property up rather than trying to tear the backside out of it.
And do you believe it will be the informed and educated landlord that gets the best professional advice, tax advisor, mortgage advisor, that will be the one to survive and flourish going forwards? Always. I mean, it's always been the same thing. If you do, you pay cheaply, you pay twice. So you just need to get the right advice. And I do think that however you want to describe it, hive learning, the ability of people to come to a site like yours, see all that stuff in one place,
experience from other people who've done it, the ability to get in touch with other people who've done it and say, well, I'm thinking of doing this, what did you do? And they can say, well, this is what I did and it worked for me. That's a fantastic resource, and that's a completely different thing from what anybody's had in the past. And I think the ability to do that is worth its weight in gold. I think people are really lucky to have these sort of resources around.
Oh, well, thank you so much for the vote of confidence there. As we like to say, Property Tribes can help other people's hindsight be your foresight. And I think that, you know, sums it up really, doesn't it? Because there are risks in property and you can mitigate them by learning from the mistakes that others made.
Yep, and unfortunately people do make mistakes. But as you say, learn by other people's mistakes. We've all done it. And looking back over my career, are there things I'd have done differently? Possibly, but I've been very, very lucky in the period that I've been in the agency game. It was a spectacular time. I've always worked in London, and it's been a time where people really appreciated and could afford to pay for the right advice. These days, people have a huge amount of choice. You know, they can go online, they can do it themselves, they can use an expensive agent. It's entirely their own choice. But I do think as time goes on, younger people require different forms of communication from what my generation is used to. And I think so long as agents or people who are providing services move their communication platforms forward, I think they'll continue to get the information they need.
Brilliant. Well, it's been such a pleasure talking to you, Ed. Thank you very much for taking part in Property Tribes TV. And I hope you won't be a stranger to us, because it's been so great to have your contribution here. And good luck with Vuba, and I'm sure we'll be hearing more about it in the future. Good.
Well, thank you very much, and I look forward to welcoming some of your landlords to using our service. Thank you.
Fantastic.